Welcome back to today's episode. Last show we released on Sunday was The Changeling. It was a horror thriller based off a 2017 novel, featured a primarily African-American cast, took place in New York City, had the writer Victor Laval, who was heavily involved in the series. I think he narrated it. In this show, it's called The Other Black Girl. It's also a thriller. It's a satirical thriller. It's based off the 2021 book written by Zakiya Dalila Harris. Also takes place in New York City. Features two African-American leads, right?
And Nella and Hazel.
And the writer is also very involved in the storytelling because she wrote the first episode, and I think she may have written more than just the first episode. In 2021, the book was one of the most anticipated and considered one of the best books to come out. It was featured in Time, the Washington Post, Entertainment Weekly,
Why was it so heavily promoted?
Well, I think the title has a lot to do with it. And then also the fact that it's based on, like, you write what you know, right?
Yeah.
So this is based off Zakiya Harris's real experiences that she had when she was working off Penguin Random House's imprint, Knopf Doubleday.
Oh, she worked for Penguin?
Well, she worked for Knopf Doubleday, which again is a spin-off, a division of Random House. And so, or Penguin Random House. Her sister actually also works for NPR, if I understood that. So I found it funny when NPR considered it one of the best books of 2021.
I mean, this is a horror TV show. So how is it based on her personal experience?
You didn't get that as, like, was it even that horrific in the first episode?
Not in the first episode,
Yeah,
but I imagine that it's going to get...
There's like microaggressions, there's macroaggressions,
Yes.
It's dealing with racism. Like, that's the type of thing that is real to life. It's kind of like I May Destroy You. It's kind of like Woke, and where those, I think the creators of those shows also based it off their true experiences.
I think that it's more like Sorry to Bother You, where it's like it really does just focus on the satire. It's not even really that woke a TV show. It's not like Velma, where it like tries to jam it down your throat. This is really just dealing with Nella. She is someone who works at the Wagner bookstore, and we see a flashback of that in like 1988. There's this African-American woman. She's running to an elevator. She's in a state of distress. She's trying to get out, and then they did this cool transition shot where when she runs into the elevator, really like suddenly she's in a subway somewhere, and then there are like 5 people in the subway, but they're brainwashed or they're zombies. Something is going on with them. They actually kind of reminded me a little bit like Us, because the monsters and those don't really talk, and they like surround her, and then that's when we cut and we get our introduction to Nella.
That's much more surreal than I was led to believe. Get more into that. Like, what happened? So, from what I understood, she's working at Wagner Books, like you said, and she's the only African-American at the company, right? She's the only black girl.
Yes.
Yes. And then she finds that Hazel is hired, and so she thinks, this is going to be my best friend. We're going to be able to bond.
And they do bond for the first, like, I would say half of the episode. In fact, where she works, that little cubicle setting, is why it reminded me so much of Sorry to Bother You, because it looks like the office that Lakeith Stanfield works for in that movie.
Okay.
Here, it's the same thing. And, so one of her friends are about to leave. It's like, and she feels like she's kind of the token black girl.
Yes.
And then once her friends leave, they decide to bring on Hazel, and then they start to have like a real connection.
Like, I know it's Wagner Books, but who is in control of Wagner Books?
Her boss is Vera, and she's the one that brings Hazel on board, gives her the interview, decides to hire her. She's slightly evil, because what this whole episode kind of focuses around is that there is this author named Colin. It's played by Brian Baumgartner.
Oh, Kevin from The Office.
Yeah, and you can tell it's him, but it's been a couple years since this show came out. And
I don't know. When I saw a picture of him in this episode, he looked exactly like Kevin. I think it's because he does his own podcast, and he also does his own like show where he talks about The Office.
There was a cutout of him before they actually show him, and I recognized him more from the cutout than when they actually showed him walking around and talking.
Okay.
He wrote this book, and there is a very stereotypical token African...
Oh, don't tell me that he's racist.
It's like hinted at, because he like wrote this African American character, and it falls completely into stereotypes. And what this episode...
Tell me what those stereotypes are.
They don't say, because she's reading the book on the subway at the very beginning of the episode, and all we see is the character's name, and then she writes equals problematic.
So they don't show you any of the text?
No.
Okay.
Nothing like that. But the problem is that they are going to throw this huge party for Colin, because Colin is their biggest author. He's the one that like is the moneymaker. He's carrying Wagner Books. ducks on their back.
Yeah, he's presented as the whale.
And so when Nella is speaking to Hazel is saying, you should definitely tell Colin straight up, because it didn't really seem like Vera was taking the problems that Nella was pointing out very seriously.
Vera? Yeah, so Hazel's brought on board real quick, and then she's put in charge of their biggest client? That seems like
no. Everyone's going to be showing up to this party later.
Yeah.
So Hazel is just saying when she's speaking to Nella, you should go up to Colin and say to his face how you have a problem.
Oh, so she's just giving her some advice.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and we also get like a quick scene. There were some pretty recognizable faces in this. I was glad to see that Hunter Parrish is in this. Apparently,
from Weeds.
Owen. Yeah, he's going to be Nella's boyfriend, and he is only in it for one scene, as well as Malika. She was. It takes place in a bar. She reminded me of one of the characters from Harlem, because I think she's queer in this, and also she's as eccentric as it seemed like
she does play the gay best friend.
Yeah.
But is that too much of a stereotype?
I wouldn't say so, because I don't know. We only have seen one episode or one scene with her.
You didn't get
so
enough
far.
to notice, yeah.
Yes. So when they actually go to this party later on, I have to give the show a lot of credit, because even though the stakes seem pretty low, all Nella has to do is go up to Colin and say, hey, I have a problem with your character.
They do well with the intensity, is that what you're about to say?
Yeah, it actually was pretty intense, because Vera, she does not want, she told Nella, don't tell him that. Just don't say anything.
I have to ask, though. Is it Vera or is it Vera? Because you pronounced it both ways.
I mean to say Vera, but I don't...
You just slip back into Vera.
Yeah.
All right, okay.
So when they are having this conversation, Colin is like, so did you like the book, Nella? And Nella decides to say, she's like, well, it was tragic, and it was, good in some parts, but I did have some problems with this character. And just the second you see it, I think that I liked Brian Baumgartner's, his acting the most, because you can see in his face the disdain he has for Nella, but also not trying to come across as racist. Like, it's obvious he wants to yell at her, but he's also very embarrassed. The facial expressions are really good there, and then that's when we get the turn. And I assume this is one of the 10 episodes, this is what they're going to be about, because Hazel decides to be like, I actually liked your character that much. And Nella was expecting Hazel to back her up, and instead decides to put her in this terrible position. Hazel is probably going to be the one that gets a higher position, because Nella has completely decided to abandon her orders. And now Nella becomes increasingly more paranoid as a mysterious message.
All it takes is really one time of your friend supposedly doing that to you, where I feel like you would just like stop trusting that person.
Throughout the whole episode, and maybe I think it was supposed to be one of those things where when the turn happens, it was supposed to be right in front of your eyes, where you were like, oh, obviously Hazel was going to be evil, but it just came as like such a shock to me, because I was like, wait.
So the twist worked.
Yes, because they dedicate multiple scenes to Nella and Hazel talking, and how it seems like they're really connecting, and like even Vera is trying to hang out with both of them, but it's like, because they're like, it actually kind of goes off on both sides. It's not even really that progressive a TV show, which I have to also give it credit for.
Well, they didn't want to fall into that quite trap anymore, because as the author put it, she said that white wokeness and Karens have been portrayed a lot in the media lately, and they're no longer surprising in the same way that they would have been at the time that when Get Out was coming out. So she wanted to definitely make it more nuanced.
It did remind me of a Jordan Peele, like any type of his films that he does.
It was also
TV
supposed to be
shows,
based off of like Stepford Wives and stuff like that.
Yeah, because there's always this like slightly uncomfortable feeling that you get while watching it.
Those type of shows.
I can't even really explain why, but it really fit the show well. It never really felt like it lost sight of where it wanted to go. And that's kind of where my pros end, because I really like the acting, I really like the characters, I really like the tone. I think that the show could be really good. But my question is, and I know that Hulu dropped all 10 episodes on the same day, the question really becomes, is there going to be a satisfying conclusion? And not only that, is there going to be a satisfying overall story arc? Because this could easily be a show by like episode 6, it just gets too weird or takes a bad story choice turn, and this whole entire thing becomes useless. Because I would give this episode overall like a 7 out of 10.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
so you enjoyed it by itself. It doesn't seem like it's all that long.
Yes. No, I was really glad to see that because I was expecting a 45-minute, hour-long episode like The Changeling was, and instead this is only like 30 minutes, so I imagine you can get through this series pretty fast.
Yes, and people have, and we will discuss actually some of the comments that were made by the co-showrunners about it without spoiling anything about the future.
Okay.
But first I want to talk a little bit about how the show got made and how the book got made. So like I said before, you write what you know, and publishers and TV studios, as soon as they see a book coming along with the title The Other Black Girl, it tends to like trigger them to be like, ooh, what's this about? You know, especially
I thought you were going to say
after...
it makes them not want to do it because they're afraid of okay.
CNN released an article in 2020, and they coined it the year America confronted racism. Now, I don't know in retrospect if that is entirely true, but we did have Black Lives Matter. There were a bunch of protests. There were marches. Kamala Harris became the first vice president, African-American woman. And you also had the Negro baseball leagues being recognized finally by the MLB as like legitimate, and the statistics being like on the same level. I didn't even know
it took that long. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that it took that long, or that was ever like in. I guess because if you ever look at like the old baseball encyclopedia or whatever, now maybe they like meld the two statistics. But Zakiya Harris is only like 30 years old. I think she was born in '92, and when they saw that she was writing a book based off her own life, a satire of her own experiences, you got two bidding wars that came out. One was for the publishing rights, and that was actually won after 14 publishers went for it for over $1 million. That was how much the deal was worth for Simon and Schuster's like spin-off company Atria Publishing won it. But then you had cheerleaders for the television show before that came out, because a lot of different places wanted to vie for that, right? Mm-hmm. And there are three different cheerleaders that I want to point out here. One is Tara Duncan, because she flipped from an executive at Netflix to Hulu right beforehand, and she's credited as clinching like the project because she's also an African-American woman. She worked on Orange is the New Black, Narcos, Bosch, The Killing. She's worked with filmmakers like Spike Lee, Baz Luhrmann, the Wachowskis, and Justin Simien. And so after 2020, when everything's going down, before the book is even like agreed on where it's going to be published, that's when the TV deal went down, and Hulu got it for again in 2020, but they didn't announce that it was actually ordered for a series until August of 2022. The other cheerleaders were Rashida Jones, who I don't know if you saw her name in the thing, but she co-wrote the pilot episode.
With the author. Right?
Yes, with the author, was Zakiya Harris. And Harris noted that Jones' commitment to the series behind the scenes was crucial to it ultimately getting made. Because, you know, so many of them die. Before, like, even if they're bought up in 2020, that doesn't mean that they have to order episodes, especially so close to a writer's strike. So I think Rashida Jones was a big impact on that. And then lastly, Temple Hill Production Company, they've also done Grease, Rise of the Pink Ladies, Dave, but most infamously, I think they came about with the Twilight series. They did all of the movies. And,
the actual, I thought you were going to say the Twilight Zone, but you mean the, like, vampire movies.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah. These aren't all sticking in the same category, obviously, but they wanted Zakiya Harris to be so part of production that they insisted upon it, and she doesn't know whether or not she would have even been able to be a part of it had it not been for them.
I think this just shows, again, I don't know what the reviews are, but whenever you are going to bring someone who's written the book really onto the series, because I remember One Piece
can work
was
and
great.
It can fail.
Well, I don't even know if it can really fail, because even if it fails, it's at least what the person who was working on the book was envisioning the whole time.
There's a lot of Stephen King stuff I think that he's been brought aboard on, which hasn't necessarily met muster, hasn't been able to make that jump from the written word to the screen.
I was just thinking more about like One Piece. We just recently reviewed that, and Ichiro Oda was like the guard dog for that.
Staying true to like keeping the producers away from like pushing, like coming in there and messing with things and saying no, I'm the original writer, and having that stand.
Because this show was a surprise. I was surprised how good or how much I actually liked it, but it could have been. I think part of the reason it could have been so easily bad. Like they could have tried to really to I don't know. It just seems like, again, the biggest thing that happens this episode is Nella going up to Colin. If that's like
if the racial undertones had become racial overtones,
yes,
kind of like you were talking about with the Changeling, which I really didn't like the Changeling, but you did mention how they have a primarily African American cast, but they didn't really make it about race.
They didn't really
at
deal
all.
with race, yeah.
Yeah, and so in a way that was kind of a breath of fresh air compared to a lot of shows that you get these days. Because if you do want to see that content, it exists already. It just feels like it's repetitive.
In fact, the only comparison that I didn't say was that this did remind me of Lovecraft Country, just because of the horror aspects and it deals with a similar topic.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think that this may even be better than that, looking back on
Wait,
everything.
really? Because you really like Lovecraft
I know
Country.
that I put Lovecraft Country back in 2020 on my top list, but it only lasted one season, right?
Yeah, but I don't know if it was on, like, they had a huge fan base. I don't know if HBO canceled Westworld at the same time. I think they were getting rid of a lot of stuff, and it was on HBO, right?
Okay.
I'm not going to, look back on...
No, Lovecraft Country was on HBO.
Good. Okay. The title of this episode is called They Say I'm Different. It's written again by Rashida Jones and Zakiya Harris. It's directed by a lady named Mariama Diallo. First time I've read that name. She also directed I think, movie that was called Hairwolf. And I think hair is supposed to be kind of a big deal in the series. Yes? Did they not touch upon it yet?
Not yet.
Okay, I think that comes along later. But it's about a black hair salon where they're fending off a strange new monster, which was white women intent on sucking the lifeblood from black culture. Less nuanced than this, I would probably think. You've talked about Nella Rogers from this episode, Sinclair Daniel, Hazel May McCall, Ashley Murray, who was... did you recognize her? Hazel, who played Hazel? She was Josie from Riverdale, or she was in that short-lived Katie Keene, because if you remember Josie and the Pussycats...
That's going way back.
Yeah, we didn't even release that podcast because it was so long ago. There's Malika, who was from the 4400. I don't think you like that show. Owen, obviously. Silas from Weeds. And they kind of added more depth to his character. I did get some differences from the book. For instance, there are no microaggressions or misogyny in the books.
Wow.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That's ridiculous.
This first episode was all about microaggressions thrown at Nella.
No. The real difference is with Hazel, we wanted to show them as friends, or possible friends, and you don't really see that in the book. So I guess it's almost immediately when she's able to, like, register that Hazel isn't the good guy. And then Sophie and Vera are actually portrayed differently than they were in the book. Now, you haven't mentioned Sophie, so maybe she's not around yet. And then this also, they moved it up 5 years because I think the book took place in like 2018 and now it takes place post-pandemic 2023. I don't know if anybody's wearing a mask.
Well, I know that the only time, you're supposed to think it's present day after the intro scene, but the only time they show what year it is the beginning when the young black woman in 1988 is running into the subway.
Okay. And then did you see any influential podcasters in this episode? Not yet? Okay.
No.
That comes along later.
Is that like a cameo or is that...
Well, there's someone who's in it, but it's not someone that you would have like immediately recognized.
I don't know where I know Sinclair Daniel from, but I think that she was perfectly cast in this role.
Yeah, I don't think she's been in much before this either. Not as a lead. They do have Richard, who you haven't mentioned. He's the main character in Travelers. He's one of the main characters in Will and Grace.
He might be the person who's even Vera's boss. Like he might be the one that owns the whole company. Because his name is
Richard Wagner, and it's Wagner Publishing, so that would probably be the case. This has been compared to. Do you have any comparisons?
Like I said, I have Lovecraft Country, Us, Sorry to Bother You, and even The Changeling, because they came out like 5 days apart, streaming platforms.
Those are all like racial centric. I was talking about more like the workplace rivalry, betrayal, stress, that type of.
I didn't have anything.
The Devil Wears Prada, Black Swan, the Evil Company. I thought maybe you would say The Consultant.
The Consultant.
Don't you remember The Consultant with the guy from Inglourious Bastards? Christoph Waltz, who was playing the bad guy.
Yes. The TV series.
Yes,
I was thinking a movie. Okay.
No, I was talking about the show that you did the research, or you watched the first episode.
Yeah, I can see the comparison there.
And then I wanted to also say industry because the main lady in that is also a black girl, and she betrays a lot of people. So she's more of the Hazel character than the Nella character.
That tracks. I would say that is actually maybe even the most accurate, probably comparison of characters that you can make.
Cool. Harris cites Passing by Nella Larson, Octavia E. Butler's Kindred, and Toni Morrison's Sula. as well as Get Out and Stepford Wives for basing the novel and the TV show off.
I know that Get Out was based on the Stepford Wives. So
it all comes together. Generally, there have been favorable reviews to it. It has a 6.6 on IMDb, but if you look at the IMDb user reviews, they're basically 9s and 10s. I didn't even see any like 1s. It wasn't even review bombed in any way. 67 on Metacritic. You got the people who liked it, like Collider, IndieWire, Decider, AV Club. Even the Arizona Republic liked it. Bill Goodykins came out saying that it's a mix of genres, one of its strengths, and stated the other black girl is all over the place in terms of genre and all the better for it. So, and then as far as dislikers, you've got Guardian, Telegraph, so 2 British, and then Roger Ebert. Now,
Guardian didn't like it.
Not at all.
That's a little surprising, but okay.
The Roger Ebert one was interesting because if you came into this and gave it like a 3, I was going to read this and say, well, does this agree with your opinion? And I've heard it with other shows, so I wasn't going to be too surprised.
What did it say?
But it said, what could have been an enthralling story about assimilation to the highest degree ultimately fumbles under the weight of dozens of films and miniseries that preceded it. Perhaps if the novel came out on the cusp of the release of Get Out, this adaptation would be more appealing instead of being almost offensive in its mediocrity.
Well, the book was made in like 2021, so it was made like 5 years after Get Out.
Yeah.
So like, but it's not like
I think he's just saying, or whoever wrote it was saying that it's not introducing anything new. Like you've seen it before, but I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I'm glad that it seems like the bulk of people enjoyed it. She was asked a ton throughout her book tour, Zakiya Harris, about how her book version compared to her, right?
Yes.
And so once it became a TV show, she got kind of tired and she divorced herself from the character. And she's like, we wrote it a little bit different. So it's not my experiences completely anymore. And this can be and that's kind of like, you're letting it fly. You're releasing the bird.
Is this a limited series? There's not going to be a season 2, or there is?
Well, the co-showrunners, there's a pretty big twist at the end of the book. And there's a pretty big twist at the end of the season. They changed enough of the story where this Gus Hickey, that's the showrunner, as well as Jordan Redout, they tweaked it and they made it so that there could be a second season.
Okay.
Yes. In fact, they're like teasing it. The last thing I'll leave you with is that this really did sneak under the wire. It finished filming February 13th, 2023 after being greenlit, I think, in August, and the principal photography beginning in October 31st, 2022. They filmed in Atlanta, Georgia, but it's just interesting that they were able to get it in so quickly. So, any more time, and I don't even know if they would have had enough time to post-production, edit it, and stuff. But, thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.
Bye.